I cheated on you. The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them, my voice trembling as I sat across from Mark at our kitchen table. I had rehearsed this moment in my head for weeks, imagining every possible reaction he might have: anger, heartbreak, yelling. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Mark didn't flinch. He didn't shout or slam his fist on the table. He just stared at me, his face unreadable, his fingers tapping lightly against the wood. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, until he finally leaned back in his chair and folded his arms across his chest. "Okay," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Okay?" I echoed, confused. I had braced myself for a storm, for accusations and tears, but this unnerved me. He tilted his head slightly, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "I've been having an affair too," he said, his tone casual, as if he were commenting on the weather. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "What?" I whispered, my stomach dropping. Mark shrugged. "I've been seeing someone else. Her name is Tasha." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. I had come clean because I couldn't live with the guilt anymore, because I wanted to fix what was left of our marriage. But this wasn't what I expected. "You've been..." I started, but my voice faltered. "For a while now," he said, cutting me off. "And since we're putting everything on the table, I think it's time you met her." I stared at him, my heart pounding as the weight of his words sank in. "What do you mean?" Mark's lips curled into a faint, almost smug smile. "I mean, she's moving in with us. 12 years. That's how long Mark and I had been married. We were the kind of couple people described as solid, practical, dependable, and maybe a little boring. From the outside, we had it all. A nice house in the suburbs, successful careers, and a marriage that looked picture perfect. But behind closed doors, things weren't so simple. Mark was a financial analyst, sharp and detail-oriented, with a knack for problem-solving. He approached life with the same calculated precision he used at work, and while that made him great at managing our finances and planning for the future, it left little room for spontaneity or emotion. Over the years, I found myself craving something he didn't seem able or willing to give: attention, warmth, passion. I wanted to feel wanted, not just like another item on his to-do list. It wasn't always like this. In the early days of our marriage, Mark had a softer side. He'd bring me flowers for no reason, plan surprise weekends away, and hold me like I was the most precious thing in the world. But as time went on, life got in the way. His long hours at the office, our never-ending mortgage payments, and the quiet disappointments that neither of us ever voiced, built walls between us. I tried to fill the gaps in other ways. I threw myself into my work as a real estate agent, relishing the thrill of closing deals and the satisfaction of helping clients find their dream homes. It was a fast-paced job that kept me busy, but it didn't fill the emotional void. I'd come home after long days, exhausted and aching for connection, only to find Mark buried in spreadsheets or glued to the TV. And then Nathan came along. He was a client, a wealthy entrepreneur looking for a luxury property to add to his portfolio. From the moment we met, there was an energy between us that I couldn't ignore. Nathan was charming in a way that felt effortless, with an easy smile and a voice that dripped confidence. He was attentive in a way I hadn't experienced in years, always asking about my day, my interests, my dreams. At first I told myself it was harmless, just a little ego boost, nothing more. But the more time I spent with him, the harder it became to draw the line between professional and personal. Our affair started on a rainy Thursday afternoon. We had just finished touring a property, a sprawling modern estate with floor-to-ceiling windows and an infinity pool that seemed to stretch into the horizon. Nathan suggested we grab coffee to discuss the details, and I agreed, thinking it was just another part of the job. But as we sat across from each other in that quiet cafe, something shifted. The conversation turned personal, too personal, and before I knew it, he was reaching across the table to brush a strand of hair from my face. "You deserve to be appreciated," he said, his voice low. Those words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how starved I was for validation until that moment, and it felt like Nathan saw through every wall I'd built around myself. One thing led to another, and by the time I left his hotel room that evening, my world had tilted on its axis. The affair didn't last long, just a few weeks, but it was enough to shatter the fragile foundation of my life. I ended it after realizing I couldn't keep lying to myself or to Mark. The guilt ate away at me, a constant ache in my chest that no amount of rationalizing could soothe. I told myself I wasn't the only one at fault, that Mark's emotional distance had pushed me into Nathan's arms, but that didn't make it any easier to sleep at night. I spent weeks agonizing over whether to tell Mark the truth. Part of me wanted to sweep it under the rug, to pretend it never happened and move on. But another part of me, the part that still loved him, knew I couldn't. I wanted to fix what was left of our marriage, and I couldn't do that without being honest. The night I confessed, I sat across from Mark at our kitchen table, my hands shaking as I tried to find the words. He was scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "Mark," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, his brow furrowing slightly. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, my stomach twisting in knots. "I need to tell you something." His expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "Okay," he said, setting his phone down. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "I cheated on you." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as Mark's face went blank, his lips pressing into a thin line. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst, and I wanted to take the words back, to pretend I hadn't said anything. But it was too late. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost eerily so. "Why?" I hesitated, struggling to find the right answer. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I felt like we'd lost something, like we were just going through the motions." Mark nodded slowly, as if he were processing my words. "And who was it?" "A client," I said, my voice trembling. "It's over, it didn't mean anything. I wanted to be honest with you." His eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of something. Hurt, maybe, or anger. But then he leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Okay," he said simply. I blinked, confused. "Okay?" "Yes," he said, his tone matter of fact. "Because I've been seeing someone too." I stared at Mark, trying to process what he'd just said. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too heavy. My confession had taken every ounce of courage I had, but I hadn't prepared for this. For him to sit there, calm and unflinching, and tell me he'd been unfaithful too. "What do you mean?" I finally asked, my voice shaking. Mark tilted his head slightly, studying me with that cold, calculating expression I'd grown used to over the years. "I mean, I've been seeing someone else," he said, his tone even. "Her name is Tasha." Tasha. The name felt like a slap in the face, sharp and unfamiliar. "How long?" I asked, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "A few months," he replied casually, as though we were discussing a business deal. "It started, I don't know, sometime in the spring." Spring. My mind raced, trying to piece together the timeline. That was months ago, months where he had been lying to me, just as I'd been lying to him. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice rising. "Because you opened the door," he said simply. "You wanted honesty, right? So here it is." Honesty. That word felt like a cruel joke. I had confessed because I wanted to repair what was left of our marriage, to find some way forward. But this didn't feel like a step toward healing. It felt like a punishment. "Who is she?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Mark shrugged. "She's a friend, someone I met through a colleague. She's different from you." The way he said it made my stomach turn. "Different how?" He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. "You've always been so careful, so measured. Tasha isn't like that. She's bold, she knows what she wants and isn't afraid to take it." The words stung more than I expected, cutting deeper than I thought they would. "So what does that make me?" I asked bitterly. Mark didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "It doesn't matter," he said finally. "Because she's part of my life now." I felt the floor shift beneath me. "What are you saying, Mark?" "I'm saying she's moving in," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You brought your infidelity to the table. Now I'm bringing mine." My breath caught in my throat. "Sat, you can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious," he said, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Why should I have to sneak around when you've already broken the trust between us? We can make this fair." "Fair." The word sounded absurd coming from his mouth. "You think this is fair?" I asked, my voice rising. "Bringing your mistress into our home?" Mark shrugged. "You wanted transparency. Now you have it." I pushed my chair back, the sound of the legs scraping against the floor cutting through the tension. This isn't transparency, Mark. This is insanity. Call it whatever you want, he said, his voice steady. But it's happening. And if you can't handle it, you know where the door is. I stared at him, my chest heaving with a mix of anger, disbelief, and something I couldn't quite name. Was this really happening? Was the man I had spent over a decade building a life with really turning our marriage into some kind of sick competition? The next few days passed in a haze. Mark barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was only to discuss logistics. When Tasha would be moving in, where she'd be staying, and how we would divide the house. He spoke about it with the same detached tone he used when discussing investments or quarterly reports, as if this was just another transaction to be managed. I tried to protest, to reason with him, but it was like talking to a brick wall. This isn't how we fix things, I said one evening, cornering him in the living room. I'm not trying to fix things, he replied without looking up from his laptop. I'm leveling the playing field. I wanted to scream, to shake him, and make him see how absurd this all was. But deep down, I knew that wasn't what this was about. Mark wasn't interested in fairness or honesty. He wanted control. He wanted to punish me. The day Tasha arrived felt like the final nail in the coffin. She pulled up in a sleek sports car, her long blonde hair cascading over her shoulders and her red lips curved into a confident smile. She was younger than I expected. Mid-20s, maybe, and impossibly put together, like she'd just stepped out of a fashion magazine. Mark greeted her at the door, his expression softening in a way I hadn't seen in years. Tasha, he said warmly, pulling her into a hug. She laughed, the sound bright and musical, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Mark, she said, her voice dripping with charm. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed tightly over my chest, watching as the two of them exchanged pleasantries. Tasha's eyes flicked to me briefly, her smile never wavering. You must be Lena, she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. I forced myself to shake it, my grip tighter than necessary. That's right, I said, my voice colder than I intended. It's so nice to finally meet you, she said, her tone light and cheerful. Mark's told me so much about you. I didn't respond. What could I possibly say to that? As Tasha carried her designer luggage into the house, I felt a sinking sense of defeat. This was my home, my life, and now I was being forced to share it with a woman who represented everything I wasn't. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I couldn't stop replaying Mark's words in my head. You know where the door is. The thought of leaving crossed my mind more times than I could count, but something held me back. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was stubbornness. Or maybe it was the faint, desperate hope that there was still something worth saving. But as the sound of Tasha's laughter echoed down the hall, I wasn't so sure anymore. Living under the same roof as Tasha felt like stepping into an alternate reality. It wasn't just the presence of another woman in my home. It was the way she carried herself, as if she belonged there. She moved through the house with an unsettling confidence, her laughter ringing out in the living room, her perfume lingering in the hallways. It was like she was marking her territory, one room at a time. Mark, of course, was all too eager to indulge her. He brought her coffee in the mornings, sat beside her on the couch after dinner, and laughed at her jokes like she was the most fascinating person in the world. The version of him I saw with her wasn't the cold, distant man I'd grown accustomed to. He was attentive, relaxed, almost happy, a cruel reminder of what I'd lost. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my work and pretend I didn't hear them chatting in the kitchen or see them stealing glances at each other during dinner. But the tension was inescapable, pressing down on me every second I spent in that house. Tasha didn't make things any easier. She wasn't outright hostile, but there was an edge to her that I couldn't ignore. Her comments were subtle, but pointed, designed to remind me of my place. Lena, do you mind if I rearrange the living room? The space could use a fresher vibe, she said one afternoon, her tone dripping with feigned innocence. I gritted my teeth, forcing a smile. I think it's fine the way it is. She tilted her head, her smile widening. Of course. I just thought a little change might brighten things up. But if you're attached to the way it is... I didn't respond, but the next day, I came home to find the furniture completely rearranged. It was like that with everything. Small, calculated moves that chipped away at my sense of control. She brought new dishes into the kitchen, replaced the artwork in the hallway, and even moved into what used to be our guest bedroom, transforming it into her personal retreat. Every change felt like a slap in the face, a reminder that I was being slowly pushed out of my own life. Mark, for his part, acted as though nothing was out of the ordinary. He never asked how I felt about Tasha's presence, never acknowledged the obvious tension between us. If anything, he seemed to revel in it, his subtle smirks and dismissive comments adding fuel to the fire. One evening, after an especially awkward dinner, I found myself sitting alone in the backyard, staring up at the stars and trying to remember how things had gotten so bad. I heard the sliding door open behind me and turned to see Tasha stepping outside, a glass of wine in her hand. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, not waiting for an answer before sitting down beside me. I stiffened, gripping my own glass tighter. "What do you want, Tasha?" She took a sip of her wine, her eyes sparkling in the dim light. "Just some air, and maybe a little chat." I didn't respond, keeping my gaze fixed on the sky. "You know, I admire you, Lena," she said after a moment. "It takes a lot of strength to handle a situation like this." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Is that what this is? A compliment?" "I mean it," she said, her tone almost genuine. "I don't think I could stay if I were in your shoes." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I turned to look at her, my chest tightening with anger. "Is that your goal? To get me to leave?" She tilted her head, her smile never wavering. "I'm just saying you deserve to be happy, Lena. Maybe this arrangement isn't what's best for you." I set my glass down, standing up abruptly. "Save the advice, Tasha. I don't need it." I walked inside without looking back, my hands trembling with frustration. The days that followed were a blur of tension and silent battles. I tried to hold my ground, refusing to let Tasha push me out of the home I'd built with Mark. But the truth was, I was fighting a losing battle. She had him wrapped around her finger, and every time I tried to assert myself, he sided with her. One evening, as I was clearing the dinner table, Mark pulled me aside. "You need to stop making this so difficult," he said, his tone low but firm. "Making what difficult?" I shot back, my voice trembling. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely. "Tasha's here now and she's not going anywhere. The sooner you accept that, the better." I stared at him, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You really don't care, do you? About how this is affecting me? About what this is doing to us?" Mark's expression hardened. "You lost the right to play the victim when you cheated, Lena. Don't forget that." His words hit like a punch to the gut, leaving me speechless. He walked away without another word, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen, clutching a dish towel like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. Amid all of this, Nathan reached out to me. I hadn't heard from him since I ended our affair, but his text caught me off guard one evening. "I've been thinking about you. Are you okay?" For a moment, I considered ignoring it, letting it fade into the void like so many other unresolved parts of my life, but I couldn't resist the pull. I responded, and before I knew it, we were meeting for coffee, the familiar tension between us sparking back to life. Being with Nathan again felt like a reprieve, a small escape from the chaos at home. He listened to me vent, his presence grounding me in a way I desperately needed. One night after a long conversation, he leaned in and kissed me. And I didn't stop him. I knew it was a mistake, that I was only complicating things further. But in that moment, I didn't care. Nathan became my secret refuge, the one place I could go to feel wanted and understood. But the guilt of what I was doing, of the lies I was telling, gnawed at me constantly. I was trapped in a cycle of betrayal and self-destruction, and I didn't know how to break free. Back at home, things continued to spiral. Tasha's presence was unbearable. Mark's indifference was suffocating, and I felt like a ghost in my own life. The cracks in our marriage had turned into gaping chasms, and I wasn't sure there was anything left to salvage. The tension in the house was becoming unbearable, a constant pressure that followed me from room to room. I didn't know how much more I could take. Tasha had made herself at home in every sense of the word, and Mark was more than happy to let her. They had their routines now, cooking breakfast together in the mornings, lounging on the couch in the evenings while I sat in the corner of the dining room pretending to work. It was like I didn't exist. And maybe that was their goal. To erase me, to push me out, without ever having to say the words. The breaking point came one night when I overheard them talking in the bedroom. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the door was cracked, and their voices carried down the hall. At first, it was harmless enough. Mark talking about his day at work, Tasha laughing at something he said. But then the tone shifted. "She's still here," Tasha said, her voice low but sharp. "I know," Mark replied, sounding exasperated. "I told her she could leave if she wanted to." Tasha let out a bitter laugh. "But she won't. She's clinging to this house like it's all she has left." "She doesn't have anywhere else to go," Mark said, his tone more matter-of-fact than sympathetic. "Well, maybe it's time to make her uncomfortable enough to leave," Tasha suggested, her voice dripping with venom. I couldn't listen anymore. My hands were shaking as I stormed down the hallway and pushed the door open, catching them both by surprise. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. Mark sat up on the bed, his expression hardening. "Do you mind knocking?" he asked coldly, as if I were the one intruding. "Don't," I snapped, pointing a finger at him. "Don't you dare act like I'm the problem here." Tasha leaned back against the headboard, her arms crossed, a smug smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, this should be good." I turned to her, my chest heaving. "You think you can just waltz into my life, my home, and act like you own the place? You're nothing but a glorified guest, and don't forget it." Tasha's smile widened, and she tilted her head, her gaze mocking. "Funny, because from where I'm sitting, it doesn't look like you're in control of anything." "Enough," Mark said, his voice cutting through the tension. He stood up, placing himself between us. "Lena, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself." "Embarrassing myself?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're the one who brought your mistress into our home and expect me to just live with it. You're the one who should be embarrassed, Mark." "You cheated first," he shot back, his eyes narrowing. "You opened the door to this. Don't act like you're some innocent victim here." "I came clean because I wanted to fix things," I said, my voice breaking. "Because I thought we had something worth saving. But you've turned this into a game, like it's some competition to see who can hurt the other more." Mark crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you screwed another man." The words hit like a slap, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Tasha watched the exchange with undisguised amusement, her gaze flicking between us like she was watching a particularly entertaining play. "That's enough," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "I'm done." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Done with what?" "With all of this," I said, gesturing around the room. "You, her, this nightmare of a marriage. I'm not doing it anymore." "You're finally leaving?" Tasha asked, her tone laced with mock concern. "Shut up," I snapped, glaring at her. "You're not worth my breath." I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My heart was racing, my hands trembling as I leaned against the wall in the hallway. I felt like I was coming apart at the seams, every ounce of anger and frustration bubbling to the surface. But I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I sat down at the kitchen table with Mark. Tasha was still upstairs, and I wanted to have this conversation without her smug interruptions. "We need to talk," I said, my tone firm. Mark looked up from his coffee, his expression guarded. "About what?" "About what happens next," I said. "Because I can't do this anymore. Either she goes, or I do." Mark set his mug down, leaning back in his chair. "You know my answer, Lena." I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. "So that's it? You're choosing her?" "She's not the one who broke this marriage," he said coldly. "No," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "But she's the one who destroyed what little was left of it." Mark didn't respond, and the silence between us was deafening. I felt my chest tighten as the reality of the situation sank in. He wasn't going to fight for me. For us. He had made his choice, and it wasn't me. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "Fine," I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "You can have her, but don't come crying to me when this blows up in your face." Mark didn't say a word as I walked away, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my life again. Leaving the house felt both like a defeat and a victory. I packed my things with a numb efficiency, throwing clothes into suitcases and shoving boxes into my car without allowing myself time to think. Mark didn't try to stop me, and Tasha didn't even bother to come downstairs to gloat. The silence as I carried the last box to my car was deafening. As I pulled out of the driveway, I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I did, I might lose the fragile sense of resolve holding me together. I had no idea what my next steps would be, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't live in that house anymore. I spent the first few nights at a hotel, the kind with drab curtains and a faint smell of cleaning chemicals that never quite masked the scent of mildew. The quiet there was oppressive, but it also gave me space to think. For the first time in years, I wasn't surrounded by Mark's indifference or Tasha's smugness. It was just me, alone with the consequences of my choices. The days blurred together as I searched for a place to live. I eventually found a small one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town, far enough away from the life I was leaving behind, but not so far that I couldn't imagine starting over. The apartment was modest, with outdated fixtures and a creaky floor, but it was mine. I unpacked slowly, each item pulled from a box feeling like a small step toward reclaiming my independence. Nathan called me once, not long after I left. His voice was warm, concerned, and for a fleeting moment, I considered leaning on him again. But something stopped me. As much as I cared for him, I knew he wasn't the answer to my problems. What we'd had was born out of my need to escape, to feel something, anything, other than the emptiness I felt in my marriage. I didn't want to repeat that cycle. I thanked him for his kindness and told him I needed to focus on myself. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the right thing to do. The hardest part of moving on wasn't letting go of Mark. It was letting go of the anger. I spent so many nights replaying the last few months in my mind, dissecting every argument, every cold glance, every decision that had led to the implosion of our marriage. I blamed him for bringing Tasha into our home, for choosing her over me, for turning what should have been a chance at reconciliation into a power play. But eventually, I realized that holding on to that anger wasn't helping me. It was only keeping me tethered to a past I was desperate to leave behind. Letting go didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, painful process, one that required me to confront my own flaws and mistakes. I couldn't blame Mark entirely for what had happened. My affair with Nathan had been the first crack in the foundation of our marriage, a betrayal that I could never fully take back. I had to own that, to accept that I wasn't the victim in this story. Therapy helped. I found a counselor who specialized in helping people rebuild after divorce, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could speak openly about everything I'd been holding inside. I talked about my guilt, my anger, my fear of starting over at 36. I cried more in those sessions than I ever had in my entire life, but each tear felt like a weight being lifted off my chest. My job as a real estate agent became my anchor. Throwing myself into work gave me a sense of purpose, a distraction from the chaos of my personal life. I started taking on more clients, working longer hours, and slowly rebuilding my reputation. It wasn't easy. Rumors about my personal life had made their way through certain circles, and there were moments when I felt the judgment in people's eyes. But I refused to let it stop me. As for Mark and Tasha, I heard bits and pieces about them through mutual acquaintances. They stayed together, at least for a while. I wasn't surprised. Mark was nothing if not stubborn, and I had no doubt he was determined to prove that his decision to bring her into our home hadn't been a mistake. But deep down, I knew their relationship was built on shaky ground. Whatever they had, it wasn't real, not in the way a true partnership should be. One day, months after I'd left, I ran into Mark at a coffee shop. He looked older, tired, as if the weight of everything had finally caught up to him. We exchanged polite nods, neither of us making a move to approach the other. As I watched him walk out the door, I felt a strange sense of closure. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't love him either. He was just a chapter of my life that had come to an end. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I found a new rhythm in my life, one that didn't revolve around pleasing someone else or filling the voids they left behind. I started going to yoga classes, made new friends, and even adopted a rescue dog named Milo, who became my constant companion. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself. There are still moments when the past sneaks up on me. A familiar song on the radio, a passing comment from a client, a memory triggered by something small. But those moments don't define me anymore. They're just pieces of a story that I've left behind, reminders of where I've been and how far I've come. I'm not the same person I was when this all began, and I'm grateful for that. The pain, the mistakes, the heartbreak, they shaped me, but they didn't break me. I've learned to forgive myself, to embrace the messiness of life, and to find strength in starting over. And as I sit in my little apartment, watching Milo curl up at my feet, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Peace.